joined in New Hampshire by Arnie Arnesen. She's a longtime radio and TV host in New Hampshire, Democratic nominee for governor in 1992. With her, Arnie Alpert. He's been the New Hampshire program coordinator for American Friends Service Committee since 1981, has been participating in Occupy New Hampshire. Arnie Arnesen, talk about Ron Paul. I mean, I think it's significant that less than half the people who could have turned out to vote actually turned out, and we're talking about, aren't we, something like tens of thousands of people fewer than actually voted in 2008.
Well, I think the Ron Paul story is a story that also applies to what happened in Iowa, and that is that he has a real cachet with young people and young students. And what you found out in Iowa and what you really see in New Hampshire is the students haven't come back yet. How convenient for the other Republicans, because if you had seen a strong student involvement in Iowa and a strong student involvement in New Hampshire because they were actually on campus, you might have seen even higher numbers for Ron Paul. I think that's important. But the wonderful story about Ron Paul was his statement last night in Winning. You did not include that clip. What you need to know is that the very conservative paper called The Union Leader made a decision in late November, early December to endorse Newt Gingrich. And all of us kind of checked our pulse and said, what the H are they doing? And last night, Ron Paul said, and I want to thank the Union Leader for not endorsing me. And Arnie Alpert was just saying, what a wonderful kiss on the cheek for the Union Leader, because it once again shows that this very powerful conservative tool is not effective in driving anyone to vote for their candidate of choice. So we were very, very pleased with Ron Paul's comment, and also the clear success strategy of showing that the Union Leader editorial page has no meaning, even in a Republican primary.
Arnie Arnesen, could you also talk a little bit about the role of the libertarian wing of the Republican Party? I mean, youth were significant, as you've said, but what about that wing of the party and having Ron Paul place second?
Well, let's remind everyone about the difference between Iowa and New Hampshire. I do Iowa public radio. I've done a lot of work in New Hampshire as well. In Iowa, 60% of the voters really describe themselves as evangelicals, and that's the Republican camp. In New Hampshire, that's probably closer to 20%, and maybe even less. New Hampshire is a state that doesn't trust big government or big church. It is very libertarian. The Free State Project chose New Hampshire as a place to create their base of operations if they're going to change the world as they see it. So there is a strong libertarian streak. Ron Paul obviously has great cachet and appeal for that, and it really sort of parallels the New Hampshire landscape. I mean, New Hampshire is the state that ranks second in church attendance in the United States.
Second from the bottom.
Second from the bottom, yeah, second from the bottom in church attendance. Vermont happens to be, number 50. We're number 49. So as a result, what you find is that with that libertarian appeal, and Ron Paul really rarely talking about the God issue, he really can sort of generate a rapport with the undeclared voter, which represents about 40% of the voters in New Hampshire, and then what's left of libertarians in the Republican Party.
I wanted to go to Congressman Ron Paul last night in his victory address. Okay, he came in second, but it was like one, talking about it being time to bring the troops home. This is the clip.
We've had enough of sending our kids and our money around the world to be the policemen of the world. It's the time to bring them home. Bring them home. The one thing is we do know they will come home. My goal and our goal has always been to bring them home in a deliberate fashion, to avoid major economic crisis by destroying our economy by spending so much overseas. In the last 10 years, the wars that have gone on added $4 trillion of debt. And I don't think we have been one bit safer for it. I think we have been less safe because of all the money that we have spent overseas. So this is the issue now. It is an issue that I think is crucial. Jim mentioned in the introduction that, so often they say that if we tell people that we think we should spend less in the military, they say, oh, that means you want to cut defense. No, if you cut the military-industrial complex, you cut war profiteering, but you don't take one penny out of national defense. And besides, we're flat out broke. Fortunately, we did not have to fight the Soviets. The Soviets brought themselves down for economic reasons. Do you know that they were so foolish and thought themselves so bold that they could pursue their world empire that they invaded Afghanistan?
And that was Ron Paul in South Carolina. Some experts predict Paul's foreign policy views, anti-war positions could hurt him given the state's large military institutions and heavy weapons industry. But Ron Paul says he receives more money from members of the military than all the other candidates combined. Arnie Alpert, talk about this anti-war stance and the significance of it. You were active in Occupy New Hampshire for garnering support or not in New Hampshire.
I think within the Occupy movement, there's a great diversity of views, but one of the places where people agree is about bringing the troops home and ending this, excessive military spending and the sort of an imperialist infrastructure for the United States military. I think that's a very popular move within the Occupy movement, which did include Ron Paul supporters, libertarians, and free staters, as well as people really pretty much across the political spectrum.
And the actions of Occupy New Hampshire through this primary, what you all did, and do you feel that you were successful?
Well, the Occupy movement didn't get active in the primary until very much at the end. There was a decision made, I think, in December to create the Occupy the New Hampshire primary project and invite people from other states to come here. And it was really just set up for a 5-day period with an encampment or a daytime encampment at Veterans Park right in downtown Manchester in an extremely visible place, which just happens to be across the street from the Radisson Hotel, where just about all the major media was set up. And there were tents and banners, and that gave it a great deal of visibility. So during that 5-day period, you had a lot of activities going on in the park, but then you also had Occupy activists spreading out to candidate events that were going on in Amherst and Milford and Nashua and Hudson and Manchester and Exeter, and really kind of getting in the face of the candidates with specific messages about money and politics, about the 99% versus the 1%. And I think that that movement really did have an impact on the candidates and on the political discussion that's been going on in the state, especially in the last 5 days.
I'd also like to bring in Dale Keene. He's a professor of politics at St. Anselm College in Manchester, which is where our guests in New Hampshire are joining us from. Dale Keene, can you talk about some of the demands of the Occupy protesters and the Tea Party, and how the different Republican candidates have or have not responded to the demands, and how Obama has responded to the demands?
Well, my sense is that the Occupy movement is asking us to think first about Main Street as opposed to Wall Street. I think that the Tea Party is asking us to think about how it is that we're spending our money. And my sense is that neither Obama nor any of the major Republican candidates are addressing those issues in particular. I think Ron Paul is probably the only one that's addressing those issues in any way, shape, or form.
And
I think a good example of that...
Go ahead.
No, I think a good example of that would be the fact that we've had 1 million foreclosures a year for the last 4 years. And if Bill Clinton was president, my sense is that he would be with those people every single day. It would be on the headlines, that we would be developing public policy to deal with it. And as it stands now, if you were just to listen to Obama or Romney or the other major candidates, you wouldn't get a sense that that kind of pain existed at all. And I think that's why Ron Paul's turnout, that's why his numbers are so significant, because he's attracting people who are feeling disenfranchised, and he's attracting people from both the right and the left.
Well, how much do you think his anti-war stance, Ron Paul's, played into the votes that he got?
I think it matters a lot. He's the only authentic anti-war candidate from either party. And so for those that were disappointed with Obama on the anti-war issue, there's Paul. And for those on the Republican side that recognize that we just have to change the way we're spending money, and the military is one of the ways, there's Paul. Quite frankly, he's about the only person on either side that's thinking in a big picture about how we're going to deal with foreign policy in the new world and how we're going to deal with money in a new world when there just isn't that much money.
And the way the candidates, Dale Keene, as a professor of politics at St. Anselm College, the way the candidates geared their message in New Hampshire, how is it different from the way they are appealing in other states? Was it?
I don't know that it was a lot different. I mean, I got the impression on the Republican side that outside of Paul, that they were all in their own way trying to be Ronald Reagan. I think Mitt Romney is just trying to talk about hope and the future. It sounds like it's Morning in America from Reagan's old commercials. I think Huntsman and others are talking in a kind of a broad way about hope, about the future, about the fact that we can bring America, quote, back to its greatness. But in terms of specifics for how we're going to deal with the budgetary issues we face, how we're going to deal with our military issues, there's been very little substance on those things.
I also thought it's just very interesting how few people come out to vote. I mean, when you're talking about, what is it, ABC News estimates the turnout in the New Hampshire Republican primary around, what was it, a quarter of people.
Yep.
It is so low in New Hampshire, I mean, in this country, compared to other countries. Well, how do you explain this, Dale Keene?
Well, the first thing is that New Hampshire last time around was the highest of all the states in the country. If that happens again, that's something we need to think about nationwide, not just merely New Hampshire. Secondly, I think it's because I think right now you have a bunch of millionaires running for public office. I think you have governments that are addressing issues that aren't really connecting with a whole bunch of Americans, especially blue-collar Americans. And I don't know that they see a whole lot of reason to go out and vote for either Obama or to vote for Romney or some of the others. I think there's a real disconnect between our government and a whole number of our citizens.
We're going to break and come back to this discussion. Dale Keene with us, professor at St. Anselm College, where our guests are in New Hampshire right now. Arnie Alpert of Occupy New Hampshire and American Friends Service Committee, and Arnie Arnesen, longtime radio and TV host in New Hampshire, former Democratic nominee for governor. This is Democracy Now! In this aftermath, the morning after the New Hampshire primary. Back in a minute.